My name is Naomi Lopez, and I was 32 years old when my sister stole $310,000 from our father 3 days after we buried him. When I confronted her about the missing money, she looked at me across the kitchen island of her own home and told me it was her share, and I was not getting one. I looked to my mother for help, but she just smoothed her apron and told me my sister needed a fresh start. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I just turned around and walked out. But the forensic auditor I brought to the estate review a month later had plenty to say. He opened his laptop, slid a printed ledger across the table, and asked my sister to explain one specific wire transfer to the federal investigators standing in the hallway. Watching her face drain of color as the reality of a federal tax trap closed around her is the only reason I am sharing this story today. Welcome to Pana Vengeance, where we sit with the quiet betrayals that tear families apart and the people who choose to fight back. If you have ever watched money change someone you love, you will feel every word of this story. Drop a comment below right now. How old are you and what city are you listening from? And please make sure to hit subscribe. Before I tell you about the empty accounts, you need to understand what that money meant. We grew up in Kailua on the windward side of Oahu. Our house is a single-story ranch my parents bought 30 years ago, back when middle-class families could still afford a yard near the ocean. Today, the Hawaiian real estate market has turned those modest homes into unreachable gold mines, but to my father, it was just home. He was a retired marine biologist, a quiet man who spent his life studying coral reefs and saving a portion of every paycheck he ever earned. He believed in preparation. He believed in the quiet math of a secure retirement. He drove the same beige sedan for 15 years and fixed his own plumbing so that my mother would never have to worry about outliving her savings. My sister Bella is 4 years older than me and operates on a different kind of math. Bella believes the world owes her a lifestyle she has never earned. Growing up, I worked the evening shift at the front desk of a Waikiki hotel to pay my own way through college. Bella cycled through failed boutique businesses, maxed out credit cards, and relied on a steady stream of silent bailouts from our parents. She is the classic golden child, the one whose repeated mistakes are always reframed as bad luck. My mother, Rosa, spent decades cushioning Bella from the consequences of her own actions. I watched it happen my entire life, but I always assumed there was a limit. I was wrong. My father passed away suddenly from a heart attack on a Tuesday evening. The shock of it left my mother untethered. She wandered the hallways of the Kailua house like a ghost, touching his coats in the closet and forgetting to eat. I stepped in and handled the arrangements. I ordered the catering, booked the church, and picked out the casket. On the day of the wake, Bella pulled into the church parking lot in a brand new, leased luxury SUV. She wore a black silk dress and oversized designer sunglasses, weeping loudly whenever an extended relative approached to offer condolences. But from my seat in the second row, I watched her scrolling on her phone during the eulogy. I dismissed it at the time. I told myself people grieve differently. I was too focused on holding my mother upright to pay attention to the warning signs. 3 days after we buried him, the Kailua house was heavy with silence. It was early afternoon, and the trade winds had died down, leaving the air inside the living room thick and still. The expensive floral arrangements on the kitchen counter were beginning to turn. The heavy, sweet smell of rotting plumeria flowers hung in the air, dropping bruised brown petals onto the linoleum one by one. My mother was asleep down the hall, exhausted by the grief. I sat at the dining room table with my laptop open and a stack of paper invoices beside me. The caterer, the florist, and the funeral home all needed to be paid. I work as a corporate compliance analyst in downtown Honolulu. I spend 40 hours a week hunting for anomalies in corporate ledgers. I look for the story the numbers are trying to hide. It is a job built on spotting the details people hope you will ignore. I opened a new browser tab and logged into the shared family banking portal. My father had set up the access years ago, so I could help manage things if his health ever failed. I clicked on his primary savings account, expecting to see the familiar six-figure cushion he had spent 4 decades building for my mother. The page refreshed. The screen rendered a single digit. 0. I blinked. I pressed the refresh key again, listening to the sharp click of the plastic keyboard in the quiet room. The screen reloaded. 0. My hands went cold. A strange metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. I dragged the cursor to the transaction history and clicked. The ledger populated with a single line item. A withdrawal of $310,000 had been executed and transferred to an external routing number. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I checked the timestamp on the transfer. It was initiated the exact same morning we stood in the church and buried him. While I was handing out memorial programs and my mother was staring at a wooden box, my sister had logged into our father's life savings and bled the account dry. The math clicked into place cold and unforgiving. The brand new leased SUV at the wake, the way Bella hovered near my father's home office the day he died. Grief makes people vulnerable, but greed makes them sloppy. She had taken everything. That money was not a luxury fund. It was the only thing standing between my mother and the crushing cost of living on this island. Without that cash, my mother could not afford the rising property taxes, the groceries, or the electricity to keep the lights on. Bella had not just stolen an inheritance, she had stolen our mother's survival. I sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the ceiling fan tick overhead. My chest tightened, but the sensation rising inside me was not the urge to scream. Screaming is an emotional reaction, and emotions leave no paper trail. I am an analyst. When the numbers do not add up, you do not throw a tantrum. You trace the ledger. You find the leak. I closed the laptop. The dying plumeria dropped another soft petal onto the counter. I knew what I had to do next. I had to drive across the island and look my sister in the eye. I needed to see exactly how comfortable she was with ruining our mother. The drive from my apartment in downtown Honolulu to the windward side of the island takes 30 minutes on a clear day. I took the Pali Highway winding up through the Kulau Mountains, where the dense tropical canopy blocks out the sun. The rain started near the summit, drumming a steady, relentless rhythm against the windshield. I kept both hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, staring at the red taillights of the car ahead of me. My mind ran the numbers over and over, playing out every possible administrative error, every banking glitch that could explain a missing $310,000. But my gut already knew the truth. I was not driving toward a misunderstanding. I was driving toward a theft. I pulled into the driveway of the Kailua house. The beige sedan my father drove for 15 years sat parked in its usual spot under the carport, looking hollow and abandoned. Parked right behind it, blocking it in, was Bella's new luxury SUV. The chrome gleamed even under the overcast sky. I turned off the ignition, grabbed my leather tote bag, and walked to the front door. I did not bother to knock. The smell hit me the second I pushed the door open. It was a suffocating, sickly sweet odor. The expensive funeral plumeria arrangements we had brought back from the memorial service were sitting on the kitchen counter, rotting. The edges of the yellow and white petals had turned a bruised brown, weeping a sticky residue onto the ceramic tile. Nobody had bothered to throw them away. The decay was just sitting there, quietly poisoning the air. It felt like a physical manifestation of what was happening to our family, right in plain sight. I found my sister in the living room. Bella was stretched out on the rattan sofa, her bare feet propped up on the mahogany coffee table. She wore a silk kimono over her loungewear, balancing a silver tablet on her knees. Her acrylic nails tapped a rapid, erratic rhythm against the glass screen. She did not look up when I walked in. My mother, Rosa, stood a few feet away in the kitchen, running a damp sponge over a counter that was already perfectly clean. Her shoulders were hunched, her movements rigid and mechanical. She was trying to stay busy, trying to outwork the grief that had settled into the marrow of her bones. I walked straight to the coffee table and stood over my sister. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out the printed banking ledger, and dropped it directly onto the glass screen of her tablet. Bella sighed a sharp breath through her teeth, annoyed by the interruption. She picked up the piece of paper, holding it by the corner as if it were coated in grease. Her eyes scanned the single line item: the withdrawal, the destination routing number, the zero balance. I watched her pupils trace the digits, waiting for the shock, waiting for the denial or the panic of being caught. Nothing happened. Her pulse did not jump. Her breathing did not hitch. She simply slid the paper off her tablet, letting it drift onto the floor, and went back to scrolling. I asked her where the money went. My voice was low, stripped of any warmth. Bella swiped her finger across the screen, magnifying a photo of a high-rise balcony. She told me she was looking at real estate in Nevada. She said the tax rates were better, and the condo amenities were top tier. She spoke with the casual, breezy tone of someone discussing weekend brunch plans. I asked the question again, stepping closer to the sofa. Bella finally locked the tablet and looked at me. Her expression held no guilt. It held a chilling, bulletproof entitlement. She leaned back against the cushions, crossing her arms. She looked me dead in the eye and delivered the line that would alter the trajectory of our lives forever. "It is my share, and you do not get one." The sheer audacity of the statement hung in the humid air. I demanded to know how she could justify taking our father's entire life savings 3 days after putting him in the ground. I asked her how she expected our mother to pay the property taxes, or buy groceries, or keep the lights on in this house. Bella rolled her eyes, an exaggerated juvenile gesture. She complained that I was being dramatic. Then she let out a sharp, bitter laugh and shook her head. She said our father had made everything so difficult for no reason. She complained about how complicated Dad made his retirement accounts, setting up all those unnecessary deferred structures and obscure tax designations. She said he always hid his wealth, and she was just streamlining the estate. That single complaint, spoken out of pure arrogance, was the first crack in her armor. She was annoyed by the paperwork. She did not understand the financial architecture my father had built. She just saw cash and took it. She had no idea what kind of trap she had just blindly walked into. But I did not warn her. I just stared at her, memorizing the smug curve of her smile. Before I could ask about the routing number, Rosa abandoned the kitchen sink and hurried into the living room. She did not position herself beside me to demand answers. She walked straight to the sofa and placed herself physically between me and Bella. My mother wiped her wet hands on her apron and looked at me with pleading, desperate eyes. Rosa told me to lower my voice. She said the neighbors would hear. I pointed to the paper on the floor and told my mother that Bella had just emptied the bank accounts. I waited for my mother to gasp, to demand the money back, to scold the daughter who had just robbed her blind. Instead, Rosa reached out and stroked Bella's hair. My mother looked at me and said, Bella had been through a tough time recently. She said Bella's last business venture had failed through no fault of her own, and that my sister just needed a fresh start. Rosa's voice trembled, but her words were laced with a toxic, defensive edge. She told me I had a good corporate job. She said I paid my own bills and had a pension waiting for me. Then my own mother stood in the decaying smell of the funeral flowers and called me greedy for questioning my sister's right to take everything. The betrayal radiated from my mother's words, sinking deep into my chest. Rosa was not a victim in the dark. She was a willing participant in her own ruin. She was so terrified of losing her golden child that she was volunteering to freeze in the dark just to keep Bella warm. You cannot save a drowning person who is actively fighting the lifeguard. Bella smirked from behind our mother's shoulder, victorious and untouchable. She expected me to scream. She expected a typical family shouting match filled with tears and slammed doors. A screaming match is an emotional release. It validates the conflict and gives the other person a chance to play the victim. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I bent down, picked up the printed ledger from the rug, and folded it neatly into perfect thirds. I slipped the paper back into my leather tote bag and zipped it shut. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter another word. I looked at my mother one last time, memorizing the tragic, frightened set of her jaw. Then I turned around, walked out the front door, and closed it quietly behind me. Standing on the front porch, listening to the rain hit the broad leaves of the monstera plants, I realized the true scope of the war ahead of me. I was entirely isolated. I was facing an antagonist who believed she was above the law, and a mother who would lie to protect the thief. If I wanted justice, I could not fight them in the living room. I had to fight them on paper. And my first stop was the bank. The glass doors of the downtown Honolulu branch slid open, releasing a wave of artificially chilled air into the humid street. I stepped inside, letting the heavy tropical heat slip off my shoulders. The lobby was a sanctuary of polished marble and hushed conversations. It smelled of citrus floor cleaner and starched uniforms. I walked straight to the reception desk and requested an immediate audience with the branch manager. I presented my father's death certificate, sliding the thick, embossed paper across the granite counter. The receptionist cast a sympathetic downward glance and guided me to a frosted glass office in the back. The manager was a man in his late 50s, wearing a tailored navy suit that seemed a fraction too tight around his collar. He reviewed the death certificate, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. When he pulled up the family account on his monitor, the color drained from his face. He leaned back in his leather chair, intertwining his fingers, resting them on his stomach. He refused to look me in the eye. Instead, he focused his gaze on a brass paperweight sitting near the edge of his desk. I demanded to know how the institution allowed a $310,000 withdrawal without triggering a fraud alert. My voice remained entirely flat. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, hiding the faint tremor in my fingers. The manager cleared his throat, shifting his weight. He explained the mechanics of the joint owner designation. He told me that 6 months ago, during the early stages of my father's declining health, my mother had signed authorization forms adding my sister to the primary checking and savings profiles. Rosa had intended to grant Bella access to help pay medical bills and manage household expenses, but banking algorithms do not measure intent. They only read permissions. To the financial system, Bella possessed the exact same operational authority as the man who spent 40 years earning the wealth. He recited corporate policy with practiced robotic precision. A joint account holder moving funds to a separate institution does not qualify as unauthorized activity. The transfer was cleared, reviewed, and finalized. The system deemed it a legitimate domestic wire. I sat in the sterile office, listening to the hum of the central air conditioning unit. The agonizing reality of the legal framework settled over me. Bureaucracy is not designed to protect the vulnerable. It is designed to limit institutional liability. The very mechanisms created to assist aging parents had been legally weaponized to strip them bare. According to the state, my sister was not a thief. She was simply an authorized user executing a standard transaction. I felt a cold pressure building behind my ribs. The manager offered a hollow, scripted apology and reached for a stack of brochures about estate planning. I ignored his gesture. I told him I was not leaving the office without a printed, itemized ledger of every single transaction processed within the last 30 days. I needed to see the granular data. I needed the footprints. He exhaled a weary breath, but complied, clicking his mouse several times. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out 3 warm sheets of paper. He slid them across the polished mahogany desk. I picked up the ledger. My corporate compliance training took over, silencing the grief. I scanned the columns, searching for anomalies, skipping past the mundane grocery purchases and pharmacy copays. My eyes darted down the rows of neat black digits, hunting for a fracture in the narrative. Halfway down the second page, a tiny specific charge stopped my breath. $25. The vendor listed was a local mobile notary service. I checked the corresponding date printed next to the charge. The transaction had cleared exactly 3 days before my father passed away. 3 days before his death, my father was lying in a private room at Queens Medical Center. He was submerged in a medically induced coma, his lungs kept moving by a mechanical ventilator. He could not open his eyes. He could not speak a single syllable. He certainly could not sit up and provide a lucid sworn signature to a state-commissioned notary public. I reached into the front pocket of my leather tote bag and my fingers wrapped around a cold, slender piece of metal. I pulled the object out and placed it gently on the center of the manager's desk. It was a silver-barreled drafting tool. Specifically, it was my father's favorite blue graphite mechanical pencil. Growing up, I spent countless evenings watching him chart coral reef degradation at our kitchen table. He was a notoriously meticulous man, driven by the rigid protocols of scientific observation. He despised standard ink pens. He claimed ballpoint ink smeared, faded, and ruined the integrity of a document. For 3 decades, he signed every single official paper, from tax returns to mortgage renewals, using only that specific blue lead. He carried the drafting pencil in his breast pocket everywhere he went. It was a quirk the entire family knew. I pointed to the silver pencil on the desk. I asked the manager to pull up the digital scans of the recent authorization cards, the specific forms that granted my sister access to the deeper restricted savings tiers. The man hesitated, his nervous habit of tapping his wedding band against the armrest filling the quiet room. He clicked through his digital archives, opening a secure PDF document. He spun the flat monitor around so I could see the screen. I leaned forward, inspecting the bottom of the digital page. There, on the primary applicant line, was my father's name. The strokes were thick and heavy, pooling at the edges of the cursive loops. It was rendered in cheap, dark black ballpoint ink. The pressure applied to the paper was entirely wrong, lacking the fluid, confident sweep of a man who had written his own name 1,000,000 times. It was a shaky, uneven imitation, traced by someone trying too hard to match a stolen signature. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave, sweeping away the bureaucratic red tape. Bella had not just taken advantage of a joint checking account loophole. Bella had hired a corrupt or negligent mobile notary, brought the forged paperwork to the bank, and executed a premeditated fraud while the man she was robbing lay dying in a hospital bed. This was no longer a simple family dispute over shared assets. My sister had committed a severe criminal offense. I stared at the black ink on the monitor. The manager watched me in stunned silence, finally understanding the gravity of the paperwork he had just blindly defended. I did not ask him to freeze the account. I knew the remaining balance was already zero. I picked up the blue graphite pencil, slipped it back into my tote bag, and gathered the printed ledgers. I walked out of the bank and stepped back into the blinding Hawaiian sunlight. The pavement radiated heat against my shoes. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat staring out through the windshield at the bustling downtown traffic. My sister thought she was untouchable because she had manipulated our mother and hidden behind bank policy. She assumed I would just cry, give up, and accept the loss. She severely underestimated the consequence of leaving a paper trail, but I knew Bella was not stupid enough to just sit and wait. The moment she realized I was digging through the bank records, she would feel the shift in the wind. A thief whose territory is threatened will always strike first to control the narrative. I started the engine, bracing myself for the inevitable counterattack. My sister was about to weaponize our entire extended family against me, and I needed to be ready to endure the assault. I barely made it back to my apartment in downtown Honolulu before the digital tripwire snapped. I tossed my keys onto the granite kitchen counter and watched the Honolulu skyline reflect off the dark glass of my living room windows. My phone sat beside my leather tote bag, silent for exactly 3 minutes. Then the screen illuminated. A brief vibration rattled the device against the stone countertop. 5 seconds later, it vibrated again. Then, the buzzing became a continuous, frantic rhythm, inching the phone closer to the edge of the counter. Bella had received an automated email notification. The bank system automatically alerts a joint account holder whenever an in-person inquiry is made regarding recent transaction history. She knew I had seen the ledger. She knew I was hunting. A cornered thief has 2 options. They can run, or they can control the narrative. Bella chose the latter. She did not call me to explain or apologize. She picked up her phone and systematically dialed every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in the Lopez family directory. She launched a preemptive strike rooted in pure psychological warfare. Toxic families operate on a very specific set of unwritten rules. The primary directive is to always protect the loudest victim. Bella understood this architecture perfectly. For decades, she had played the role of the tragic, misunderstood artist, struggling to find her footing, while the world conspired against her. Now, she cast herself as the devoted, grieving daughter, sacrificing her own peace to protect our mother from a cold, calculating sibling. I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. 32 unread messages flooded my notification center. They were not inquiries checking on my well-being. They were verdicts delivered by a jury that had only heard one side of a fabricated trial. The first text was from my cousin Sophia. It read that she could not fathom how I could demand a cut of the estate while our mother was still weeping over an empty side of the bed. Another message arrived from Uncle Hector, accusing me of kicking my sister while she was down just to line my own pockets. I swiped down, watching the notifications stack up like bricks, building a wall of total isolation around me. Bella had woven a masterpiece of manipulation. According to the story, she sold the extended family. My father had entrusted her with his retirement savings, specifically to keep the funds safe from me. She told them I was furious about being cut out of the life insurance payout. She painted me as a money-hungry corporate drone who cared more about profit margins and spreadsheets than my own flesh and blood. She claimed I had abandoned my grieving mother, forcing Bella to shoulder the entire emotional and financial burden of the household. The notification icon changed, indicating a new voicemail. It was from Auntie Clara. She is my father's oldest sister, the undisputed matriarch of family gossip. Clara always harbored a soft spot for Bella. When Bella totaled her first car, driving reckless on the H1 freeway, Clara was the one who bought her a replacement, claiming the poor girl had suffered enough trauma. I pressed play, holding the speaker close to my ear. Clara did not bother with a greeting. Her voice was sharp, dripping with practiced disappointment. She told me I should be ashamed of my behavior. She said a fancy downtown office and a steady salary had turned my heart to ice. She praised Bella for giving up her freedom to manage my father's chaotic estate, praising her endless sacrifice. Clara ordered me to stay away from the Kailua house until I was ready to show some basic forgiveness and familial loyalty. The audio recording clicked off, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in my apartment. A familiar burning sensation climbed the back of my throat. The injustice of the situation felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Every instinct inside my body screamed to fight back. I wanted to open the family group chat and upload a high-resolution photograph of the forged black ink signature. I wanted to post the printed bank ledger showing the $310,000 withdrawal. I wanted to tear down Bella's pristine victim narrative and watch her burn in the ashes of her own lies. I drafted a response to Auntie Clara. I typed furiously, describing the mobile notary, describing the empty savings account, describing the sheer malice of a daughter robbing her father while a ventilator kept his lungs moving. I filled the screen with raw, undeniable truth. Then I stopped. My thumbs hovered over the send button. I stared at the glowing text. If I sent that message, Bella would simply pivot. She would claim the documents were fake. She would say my father gave her verbal authorization. She would drag me into a chaotic, endless screaming match in the mud. Emotional warfare is a game designed to exhaust the truth-teller until they surrender from sheer fatigue. An argument relies on feelings, and feelings are subjective. Bella thrived in subjective chaos. I deleted the text, character by character, until the screen was blank. I engaged my corporate compliance training, locking the emotional reaction away in a dark vault. I employed strategic silence. I walked into my home office, opened the top drawer of my desk, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I grabbed a pen. The physical act of pressing ink into paper grounds the mind, forcing logical sequence over emotional reaction. I wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. Let them talk. Words do not hold up in court. I placed my phone on the desk and switched it to airplane mode, severing the connection to the poison. I did not reply to Sophia. I did not call Uncle Hector. I let Auntie Clara's lecture echo into a void. I refused to defend myself. By offering zero resistance, I gave Bella exactly what she craved. I gave her the illusion of total, unquestioned victory. Over the next few days, the silence worked its quiet magic. Bella interpreted my lack of retaliation as cowardice. She assumed the smear campaign had successfully neutralized the threat, forcing me to retreat and lick my wounds. Her arrogance swelled, filling the empty space I left behind. She began to post serene, scenic photos on her social media accounts, accompanied by captions about healing and protecting her peace. She checked in at an expensive oceanfront restaurant in Waikiki, raising a glass of champagne to new beginnings. A thief who believes they have outsmarted the pursuit stops checking their rear-view mirror. Bella grew comfortable. She stopped worrying about the paper trail, assuming the family loyalty she had weaponized would serve as an impenetrable shield. Her inflated ego made her careless. She believed her own lies so deeply she forgot the underlying crime was still sitting on a bank server waiting to be audited. Her carelessness was precisely the advantage I required. I needed her to lower her guard so I could gather the remaining pieces of the puzzle without triggering her defensive instincts again. But as the week drew to a close, a new anxiety began to gnaw at my strategic resolve. My mother was still living in that house in Kailua, sharing a roof with a predator. Rosa had defended Bella during the initial confrontation, choosing the comforting lie over the brutal truth. I knew Bella had not shared a single dime of the stolen funds with our mother. The luxury SUV, the Waikiki dinners, the Las Vegas real estate searches were entirely self-serving. I had to know how Rosa was surviving the aftermath. I had to see ground zero of Bella's so-called sacrifice. Sunday dinner was a sacred tradition in our family, an unshakable weekly ritual my father had instituted decades ago. Even in the grip of a silent war, some routines demand to be tested. I packed a small bag, knowing I had to walk back into the lion's den. I had to observe the physical toll of my sister's greed and gather the next piece of evidence hidden in the mundane details of my childhood home. 30 days slipped off the calendar without a single word exchanged between my sister and me. I held my position, playing the role of the vanquished sibling. Late August descended upon the island, bringing a stifling, breathless heat. The trade wind stopped blowing. The air grew stagnant, settling over Oahu like a damp wool blanket. I drove back to the windward side for our traditional Sunday gathering, carrying a bakery box on the passenger seat. I needed to see ground zero. I needed to document the collateral damage of my sister's unchecked greed. I parked on the street. The driveway was empty. The luxury SUV was notably absent. I walked up the concrete path and pushed open the front door. The physical environment inside the home provided the first piece of forensic evidence. The temperature hit me instantly. It was suffocating. My father always kept the central cooling system running, maintaining a crisp, comfortable climate to preserve the vintage wooden cabinets and protect my mother's comfort. Today, the thermostat display was blank. The ceiling fans pushed hot air around in useless, lazy circles. Rosa stood near the stove, stirring a small metal pot. She wore a faded cotton house dress that clung to her spine, damp with perspiration. Gray strands of hair escaped her clips, sticking to her forehead. The kitchen smelled of sodium and artificial preservatives. She was heating canned chicken noodle soup. A month ago, this kitchen produced roasted pork garlic shrimp and fresh papaya salads. Now the menu reflected a sudden, devastating poverty. I set the pastry box on the counter. My mother offered a fragile, strained smile. Her eyes carried dark, hollow circles. The physical toll of her willful ignorance was aging her rapidly. She ladled the watery broth into 2 ceramic bowls and carried them to the dining table. I sat down across from her, pretending not to notice the sweat dripping down her neck. My gaze drifted across the mahogany surface. Beside the salt shaker sat a woven fruit basket holding 3 overripe bananas. Protruding from beneath the woven base was a stack of unopened mail. My analytical instincts honed in on the details. The top envelope featured a transparent plastic window. Through the clear film, the bold crimson font of the Hawaiian Electric Company was unmistakable. The phrase, "past due," glared against the white paper. I picked up my spoon and stirred the clear broth. I kept my voice neutral, stripped of any accusation or judgment. I asked if the condenser unit outside had broken down, offering to call a repair technician to inspect the cooling system. Rosa stiffened. Her grip on her spoon tightened until her knuckles turned white. She did not meet my eyes. She dabbed her upper lip with a paper napkin and insisted the ambient temperature was pleasant. She claimed the artificial cold made her joints ache, and opening the windows invited a better breeze. It was a hollow, transparent lie. The air outside was dead. I shifted my strategy, tapping my index finger against the table, pointing toward the fruit basket. I mentioned the utility notices. I asked a simple, direct question. I asked if she required financial assistance to keep the lights on. The reaction was instantaneous and fierce. Rosa slid her hand over the envelopes, hiding them from view. The exhausted, fragile woman vanished, replaced by a fierce defender of a manufactured reality. She raised her voice, snapping that everything was under control. She recited a script that clearly belonged to my sister. Rosa informed me that Bella was managing the estate with sophisticated precision. According to my mother, Bella was currently moving the capital into high-yield investment portfolios. Bella had told her that holding liquid cash was a terrible liability in the current economic climate. The delusion was breathtaking. My sister had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund a lavish lifestyle, and she had convinced our mother that the theft was a savvy financial strategy. Bella had not shared a single dollar of her plunder. She was dining at oceanfront restaurants in Waikiki, while the woman who gave her life sweat in a dark kitchen eating canned soup. Yet Rosa chose to endure the suffering. Acknowledging the unpaid electric bill meant acknowledging the stolen inheritance. Admitting she could not afford groceries meant admitting her favorite daughter was a predator. To protect her golden child, Rosa was willing to starve in the sweltering heat. The psychology of the enabler is a tragic, self-destructive architecture. She tied her entire identity to being Bella's shield, and she would rather sink the ship than admit there was a hole in the hull. A powerful instinct surged in my chest. My checkbook was in my leather tote. I earned a comfortable corporate salary. Writing a $200 check to the utility company would require 10 seconds of effort. I could restore the power. I could buy groceries. I could alleviate her immediate suffering. My hand drifted toward the strap of my bag. Then I stopped. The compliance analyst inside my mind vetoed the emotional response. If I subsidized my mother's poverty, I became part of the cover-up. Paying the electric bill would remove the physical consequence of Bella's crime. It would allow Rosa to continue living inside the comforting illusion. As long as the lights turned on, Rosa could pretend the investment portfolio story was true. By shielding my mother from the pain, I would be actively protecting my sister from accountability. A fraud investigation requires the victim to feel the impact of the missing funds. If someone else fills the deficit, the crime remains hidden. I had to harden my heart. I had to let the consequence arrive. I pulled my hand away from my bag and picked up my spoon. I finished the salty soup in silence. I carried my bowl to the sink and washed it under the faucet. I dried my hands, folded the dish towel, and walked back to the dining room. I kissed my mother's damp cheek. I told her to drink plenty of water and walked toward the front door. Leaving her in that suffocating room was one of the most agonizing decisions of my life. Every step toward the exit felt like a betrayal of my duty as a daughter. But I knew true rescue required dismantling the lie, not painting over it. I stepped out onto the concrete porch and pulled the front door shut behind me. The late afternoon sun glared against the pavement. I walked down the driveway toward my parked car. As I reached for my keys, my eyes scanned the perimeter of the property. I noticed the rusted metal mailbox attached to the chain-link fence. The aluminum door hung open, revealing a hollow, vacant interior. I paused, standing on the hot asphalt. My brain began sorting variables, categorizing data points. Rosa had received the final notice from the electric company. She likely received the water bill and the municipal refuse invoices. But a crucial piece of the paper trail was missing from her dining room table. If the primary savings accounts were drained to zero, the subsequent automated monthly withdrawals for property taxes or insurance premiums would bounce. Overdraft fees would trigger. The bank would generate automated physical letters warning the account holder of the negative balance. Those distinct envelope designs were absent from the pile hidden beneath the fruit basket. I stared at the empty metal mailbox. Rosa was receiving local utility bills, but the sensitive banking correspondence was disappearing. My sister was arrogant, but she understood basic logistics. To keep the illusion alive, Bella needed to control the flow of information entering the house. The realization sparked a new, urgent theory. The theft was not a singular event that ended on the day of the funeral. The financial manipulation was ongoing, and the evidence was being actively diverted before it could reach the Kailua property. I unlocked my car door, sliding into the driver's seat. I needed to access the county postal registry. I needed to see exactly where the rest of the paper trail was going. The drive back over the Ko'olau Mountains offered zero solace. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long gray shadows across the asphalt of the interstate. I gripped the steering wheel, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence in the car. My mind kept looping back to the image of that rusted, empty aluminum mailbox on the chain-link fence. Rosa received the local water and electric notices, but the sensitive financial envelopes were conspicuously absent. The bank would never simply stop sending correspondence, especially if an account dipped into overdraft territory or carried a zero balance. I returned to my downtown apartment and tossed my keys onto the granite counter. The silence inside my living room provided a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of my childhood home. I did not bother turning on the overhead lights. I walked straight to my home office, leaving the door open to the dark hallway. I booted up my workstation. As a compliance analyst, I understand that missing data is often more incriminating than visible errors. A void in a paper trail is rarely a clerical mistake. It is usually a deliberate subtraction. I navigated to the official Postal Service web portal. My father was a man of science and order. He kept meticulous records, including a secure, encrypted digital vault containing his basic login credentials for utility management and home administration. I accessed his vault, retrieving the password for the residential delivery dashboard. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, typing the credentials into the postal login screen. The loading icon spun for a few agonizing seconds before rendering the primary user interface. My eyes scanned the active service requests. Right there, at the very top of the dashboard, sat a confirmed change of address order. I clicked the digital receipt to view the specific parameters of the request. The effective date aligned perfectly with the timeline of the initial theft. The forward request was activated exactly 3 days prior to my father passing away. The destination was not a local apartment or a secure lockbox in Honolulu. The approved forwarding address routed all official personal correspondence to a commercial post office box located in Las Vegas, Nevada. The sheer audacity of the administrative diversion made my pulse pound in my ears. Bella had executed a classic interception strategy. By redirecting the mail, she controlled the entire flow of information entering the Kailua house. Rosa would never see the overdraft warnings. She would never read the penalty notices from the primary banking institution. The Las Vegas address aligned perfectly with the luxury high-rise condominiums Bella had been scrolling through on her silver tablet during our confrontation. But a calculated diversion of federal mail suggested a deeper layer of deception. A thief does not risk federal mail tampering penalties merely to hide a zero balance. An empty savings account generates standard insufficient funds letters. Those letters are easily dismissed with a quick lie to an exhausted, grieving widow. Bella was hiding something far more dangerous than a missing inheritance. She was hiding a recurring obligation. She was hiding active debt. I opened a new browser window and accessed the State of Hawaii Bureau of Conveyance's database. Property records are public domain if you know how to navigate the archaic municipal servers. I knew the system well. My father bought the Kailua property over 3 decades ago. He worked grueling overtime hours, logging endless weekends on research vessels, charting coral degradation, specifically to pay off the mortgage early. He despised owing money to financial institutions. He believed true freedom was owning the ground beneath your feet. I vividly remember the evening he mailed the final check to the bank. I was a teenager. We ordered a cheap pepperoni pizza to celebrate, and he tacked the bank confirmation letter to the corkboard in the kitchen. For 15 years, that house belonged entirely to our family, free and clear of any external claims. It was his ultimate triumph. It was the impenetrable shelter he had built for his wife. I typed the unique parcel identification number into the search field. My fingers moved across the keyboard with cold, mechanical precision. I pressed the return key. The database queried the state archives, and the screen populated with the historical timeline of the property. I scrolled past the original purchase deed from my childhood. I scrolled past the final mortgage release document from 15 years ago. My eyes reached the top of the list, expecting to see a pristine, clean title reflecting my father's hard work. Instead, a brand new document sat anchored at the top of the digital registry. It was officially recorded less than 4 weeks before the funeral. The document classification type was listed as a home equity line of credit. I clicked the hyperlink to open the scanned PDF. The pages loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing the grim details of the contract. The lender was a secondary predatory mortgage firm located on the mainland. The principal amount secured against the property was $150,000. I stopped breathing. The air in my home office turned to ice. The numbers on the screen refused to change, no matter how hard I stared at them. Bella did not just drain the liquid retirement assets. Taking the cash was a simple extraction. This was an engineered parasitic infection. She had leveraged the equity of our generational home, using the property as collateral to secure a staggering fresh line of credit. The signature on the bottom of the loan agreement was the exact same shaky dark ink imitation I had seen at the bank branch. She had saddled a paid-off house with a breathtaking amount of debt, while the man who owned it lay unconscious in a hospital bed attached to a ventilator. The chilling arithmetic of a home equity loan began to echo in my analytical mind. Unlike a standard traditional mortgage, where the principal is paid down over a fixed schedule, a credit line functions like a giant variable interest credit card attached to the roof over your head. The borrower is required to make monthly interest payments just to keep the loan in good standing. The Las Vegas post office box suddenly made horrifying sense. By redirecting the mail to Nevada, Bella was intercepting the monthly billing statements from the mainland lender. Rosa had no idea the debt existed. Rosa was already skipping meals and sweating in a dark kitchen just to afford basic canned soup. She had zero capital to service a six-figure loan. If the interest payments were neglected, the lending institution would automatically initiate default proceedings. The bank does not care about grief. The bank does not care about family dysfunction or suspected forged signatures until proven otherwise in a court of law. They only care about liquidating the collateral to recover their funds. They would foreclose on the property. They would send a county sheriff to the front porch, change the locks, and physically evict my mother from the only home she had known for 30 years. Bella had engineered a ticking time bomb and planted it directly beneath our mother's chair. The stakes instantly shifted, fracturing my previous strategy. This was no longer a patient battle over a stolen cash inheritance. It was a race against the clock to prevent my mother from becoming homeless on an island where affordable housing does not exist. I saved the PDF to my encrypted hard drive. My hands trembled as I traced the digital signature back to the notary public listed on the document. The notary stamp matched the $25 charge from the checking account. The paper trail was pristine, but the timeline presented a terrifying new variable. Bella was arrogant and reckless, but real estate transactions require sophisticated coordination. A loan of that magnitude requires property appraisals, title searches, and fast cash underwriters. Bella lacked the discipline and industry knowledge to orchestrate a property encumbrance entirely alone. She needed a facilitator. She needed someone who understood the murky, unregulated waters of distressed real estate. I closed my eyes and recalled a fleeting detail from the funeral reception. A man wearing an ill-fitting suit handing Bella a glossy business card near the catering table. An investor. The puzzle pieces began to shift, hinting at a broader conspiracy. I needed to find out who was advising my sister before they convinced her to liquidate the entire property and vanish with the remaining equity. The glow of the monitor cast long shadows across the walls of my home office. I kept the scanned PDF of the loan agreement centered on the screen, refusing to look away from the forged signature. My analytical training demanded a logical progression of events. A financial crime of this specific nature requires a precise sequence of actions. My sister possessed a profound talent for spending capital, but she lacked the operational discipline required to secure a six-figure line of credit. Bella could barely balance a standard checking account without incurring overdraft penalties. Navigating the underwriting process for a property encumbrance, compiling the necessary tax histories, scheduling the appraisals, and filing the municipal paperwork demanded a distinct type of financial literacy. I convinced myself someone else had orchestrated the transaction. Someone had handed her the blueprint. I closed my eyes, letting my memory drift back to the stifling heat of the church reception hall. The air had been thick with the scent of damp wool suits, fading perfume, and sympathetic whispers. Standing near the catering buffet, I had noticed a man hovering around my sister. He did not belong to our extended family. He wore a cheap gray suit that pulled too tight across the shoulders. A heavy gold watch caught the overhead lights every time he shifted his weight. He possessed the restless, predatory energy of a scavenger circling a wounded animal. I remembered watching him lean close to Bella, whispering something in a hushed tone, before sliding a glossy black business card into her palm. She had slipped the card into her designer purse without looking at it, her expression unreadable. I returned my focus to the loan origination paperwork. I scanned the secondary fields, zooming in on the tiny print buried beneath the primary signature lines. There was a broker identification number listed under the facilitation section. I copied the alphanumeric sequence and pasted it into the state regulatory database. The server hummed, delivering a match a few seconds later. The registration belonged to an entity named Apex Horizon Properties. The managing director was listed as Marcus Thorne. The narrative seemed perfectly logical, constructing a neat, comfortable box for my grief. Thorne was a bottom-feeding real estate hustler. He monitored local obituaries and circled vulnerable grieving families looking for a quick profit. He had spotted Bella, recognized her inherent greed, and presented a frictionless solution. I formulated an entire working theory. He had supplied the corrupt mobile notary, provided the fraudulent paperwork, and guided my sister through the forgery process in exchange for a hefty origination fee or a backdoor claim to the Kailua property. A strange, unsettling wave of relief washed over my chest. If Marcus Thorne was the architect of the fraud, then Bella was merely a pawn. She was a greedy, foolish participant, but she was not the mastermind. It is infinitely easier to direct your hatred toward a faceless stranger in a cheap suit than to accept the horrifying reality that your own flesh and blood engineered the destruction of your mother. I wanted Thorne to be the villain. I needed him to be the monster so I could salvage some fragmented illusion of my sister's humanity. I engaged my corporate compliance protocols, leaning closer to the keyboard. I spent the next 4 hours dissecting Marcus Thorne. I pulled his corporate filings, his tax histories, and his civil litigation records. I mapped his entire network of shell companies using a digital whiteboard program on my secondary monitor. I traced the physical addresses of his various limited liability corporations. They did not lead to a sophisticated financial firm in a downtown high-rise. They all pointed back to a single, dilapidated strip mall office situated behind a discount tire shop in Waipahu. I pulled up the Street View imagery. The digital photograph showed a faded awning, peeling paint and bars on the windows. I dug into the civil court dockets, expecting to find a trail of sophisticated identity theft charges or complex mortgage fraud indictments. I found nothing of the sort. Thorne had a dozen lawsuits filed against him, but they were all petty, mundane disputes. He faced litigation from unpaid drywall contractors. He had municipal code violations for unpermitted bathroom renovations. He battled complaints from buyers about leaky roofs on his quick-flip properties. He was not a criminal mastermind capable of executing a flawless bank heist. He was a low-level cash-for-homes vulture. He bought distressed properties, painted the cabinets gray, and flipped them for a marginal profit. To confirm my growing suspicion, I cross-referenced the financial disbursement from the credit line. If Thorne had brokered a fraudulent deal, his cut would reflect in the ledger. Criminals do not facilitate felonies for free. But the origination fees were standard minimal closing costs paid directly to the mainland bank. The entire remaining balance of the loan, $150,000, had been wired straight into Bella's private Las Vegas account. Thorne did not receive a single cent of the stolen equity. I stared at the digital whiteboard, watching my elaborate conspiracy theory crumble into dust. I leaned back in my desk chair, letting the cold reality settle over my skin. Marcus Thorne did not orchestrate the forgery. He had merely approached Bella at the funeral to offer a low-ball cash buyout for the house, sensing a family in transition. He had planted the idea of liquidating the asset, but Bella took that seed and cultivated it herself. The implications were terrifying. Bella had researched the equity limits on her own. Bella had navigated the online lending portals. Bella had contracted the random mobile notary, arranging for them to arrive at the exact window of time when our mother was out of the house running errands. Bella had stood over our father's dying body and deliberately traced his signature onto the application. There was no shadow broker pulling the strings. There was no external manipulation. The pure, unadulterated malice belonged entirely to my sister. The calculated cruelty was homegrown, cultivated in the same childhood bedroom right down the hall from mine. The air in my office felt suddenly thin. I closed the browser tabs, erasing Marcus Thorne from the equation. The red herring had served its purpose, stripping away the last remaining layer of my denial. I could no longer view Bella as a misguided sibling who made a terrible mistake under the influence of a bad actor. She was a predator operating with clear, deliberate intent, and a predator does not stop until their territory is secure. I looked at the digital clock glowing on the corner of my monitor. It was past midnight. The interest payments on a 6-figure credit line were steep, and Bella was currently funding a luxury lifestyle in 2 different states. The stolen cash would not last forever. Soon, the mainland bank would demand their monthly unearned tribute. When Bella ran out of liquid capital to service the hidden debt, the lender would file a notice of default against the Kailua house. My mother was sitting on a trap door, and the hinges were already starting to rust, Bella would realize the math was turning against her. A predator trapped in a financial corner will always attempt a drastic maneuver to escape the consequences. She could not maintain the illusion much longer. She would need a permanent exit strategy. She would need to erase the fraudulent debt before the bank exposed her crime to the entire family. I realized with a sudden chilling clarity what her next move had to be. She was preparing to sell the ground right out from under our mother. Tuesday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky and a notification that shattered the quiet of my apartment. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop, vibrating with a sustained urgency. I picked up the device and looked at the screen. The alert originated from the family text thread. The group chat was named Lopez Ohana. I had muted the conversation weeks ago, unable to stomach the constant stream of superficial pleasantries and passive-aggressive updates. I tapped the screen and opened the application. A new message from my sister filled the display. Bella had composed a master class in manipulation. She typed lengthy paragraphs detailing her profound emotional exhaustion. She complained about the heavy physical and mental burden of managing an aging parent. She painted a vivid picture of a devoted daughter sacrificing her own youth to keep the family afloat. Then she dropped the anchor. She announced the Kailua house was going on the market immediately. I watched the screen as the replies began to pour in. Auntie Clara responded with a string of praying hands emojis. Uncle Hector typed a long paragraph praising Bella for stepping up and making the tough, mature choices. Cousin Sophia chimed in, stating that our mother deserved a smaller place without the crushing stress of home upkeep. I read the messages while my morning coffee grew cold. It was a chorus of applause for a predator. My extended family was actively cheering for the demolition of my mother's sanctuary because Bella had wrapped the destruction in a neat ribbon of fake martyrdom. I scrolled back up and read the final sentence of Bella's message again. She announced she had already secured a private buyer. A cash investor was willing to purchase the property in its current condition. There would be no lengthy inspection periods. There would be no frustrating bank appraisals. It would be a fast, seamless close designed to alleviate the family's stress. I knew exactly who the buyer was. Marcus Thorne, the man in the cheap gray suit from the funeral reception. He was getting his discounted flip property, but Bella was getting something far more valuable. She was securing a permanent escape hatch. The financial mechanics of a cash real estate closing form a flawless laundering operation. When a property changes hands, the title company acts as a mandatory clearinghouse. They receive the purchase funds from the buyer and automatically disperse those funds to pay off any existing liens against the deed. The title must be perfectly clean before transferring ownership to the new buyer. The fraudulent home equity line of credit was sitting on that deed like a bloated parasite. During the closing, the title agent would take the buyer's cash and wire $150,000 straight to the mainland lender. The mainland bank would receive their money and officially close the account. They would never launch a fraud investigation into a loan that was paid in full. The forged signature, drawn in thick black ballpoint ink, would be archived in a digital vault and forgotten forever. The evidence of the crime would literally pay for its own deletion. After the illicit debt was cleared, Bella would pocket the remaining hundreds of thousands of dollars in pure equity. She would walk away a wealthy woman, leaving our mother destitute. It was money laundering executed through residential real estate. I picked up my phone and dialed the Kailua landline. I needed to hear my mother's voice. I needed to know if she was fighting this sudden eviction or if she had surrendered entirely. Rosa answered on the fourth ring. Her voice sounded thin, brittle, and distant, like dry autumn leaves scraping across pavement. I asked her about the long message in the group chat. I asked her if she truly wanted to pack up her entire life and abandon the home she and my father had built together. Rosa planted a white plumeria tree in the backyard the week my parents brought me home from the hospital. She spent her entire adult life tending that soil, pulling weeds by hand and watering the roots during the dry seasons. She used to tell my father she wanted to take her final breath listening to the ocean breeze rustling through those specific branches. That house was her fortress and her legacy. Now Rosa recited a fabricated script over the phone. She told me the stairs were getting too hard to climb. My chest tightened, the breath caught in my throat. The Kailua house is a single-story ranch design. There are no stairs. She told me the yard required too much maintenance, and Bella had found a beautiful little apartment for her. The resignation in her tone was absolute. She was broken by the psychological conditioning. She truly believed she was a burden and Bella was her savior. Bella had fed her a convenient narrative, and Rosa just repeated the words without even processing the physical reality of her own home. I swallowed the sharp lump in my throat and asked for the specific timeline. I asked when she had to pack her belongings and move out. Rosa said the investor was very motivated to help them out of a tough spot. She said Bella handled all the complicated paperwork so she would not have to worry her tired mind. Rosa said the title agent was coming directly to the house next Friday to sign the final papers in the living room. 7 days. 168 hours. The line clicked and went dead. I lowered the phone to the desk. The ticking clock began to echo in my quiet apartment. 7 days is a microscopic window in the legal realm. The justice system moves at a glacial pace. Drafting complaints, filing injunctions, and scheduling emergency hearings usually takes weeks or months of bureaucratic maneuvering. Bella had deliberately scheduled a 7-day cash close, specifically to outrun any potential interference. She knew a fast transaction was her only shield. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the busy Honolulu streets. Gathering evidence is a passive activity. Collecting bank ledgers and photographing empty mailboxes is the work of an archivist. An archivist watches the tragedy unfold from a safe distance and writes a detailed report about the wreckage after the smoke clears. I could no longer afford to merely observe. The pace had accelerated beyond careful investigation. It was time to build a guillotine. The rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. I was no longer trying to prove my sister was a thief. I was trying to stop a financial execution. If that deed received a signature next Friday, the forgery would be washed away forever. I needed to shift my mindset from compliance analysis to active combat. But fighting a family member in an arena they control requires a very specific type of artillery. I could not walk into a courtroom armed only with a mechanical pencil and a theory about a corrupt mobile notary. A judge would look at a joint account holder designation and a signed loan document and dismiss the entire situation as a petty civil family dispute. To stop a real estate closing dead in its tracks and force the system to pay attention, I needed an authority figure who commanded undeniable institutional fear. I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop. I closed the banking portals and the county property databases. I opened a search engine and began looking for a professional executioner. I needed someone who specialized in dismantling financial predators. I needed someone who viewed family loyalty as an irrelevant variable. I needed a forensic auditor. The leather binder resting on my passenger seat contained every shred of evidence I had gathered over the past 4 weeks. I drove through the morning traffic toward Kaimuki, a quiet residential neighborhood tucked away from the towering hotels and crowded beaches of Waikiki. The sky was a pale, bruised blue, threatening rain. I kept glancing at the binder, feeling the gravity of the documents inside. Exposing a family member to the legal system carries a unique, profound weight. You are not just reporting a crime, you are dismantling your own bloodline. I turned onto a side street lined with old monkey pod trees and parked in front of a small, independent coffee shop. Before stepping out of the car, I rested my hands on the steering wheel and closed my eyes. The smell of impending rain filtered through the air vents, triggering a vivid, distinct memory. I was 16 years old, sitting at the dining table in the Kailua house. It was late April, and my father had his annual tax documents spread across the mahogany surface. He was a creature of intense habit, organizing his receipts into perfect chronological stacks. He held his favorite blue mechanical pencil in his right hand, making tiny, precise notations on a yellow legal pad. I had just received my first paycheck from my after-school job at the hotel front desk. I was complaining about the chunk of income lost to state and federal deductions, holding my meager pay stub in frustration. My father stopped writing. He set the blue graphite pencil down and looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. His expression held a quiet, enduring wisdom. He tapped the stack of tax forms and spoke in a low, steady cadence. "Naomi, wealth is not what you take, it is what you protect." He explained that anyone could earn a paycheck or stumble into a windfall, but true security required constant vigilance. A careless person builds a house on sand, but a methodical person builds a fortress. He taught me to read the fine print, to question the deductions, and to always verify the ledger. That specific memory forged my entire worldview. It pushed me toward a career in corporate compliance. I did not learn to chase capital. I learned to guard the gates. My father spent 40 years protecting his fortress, and now I was the only one left standing on the wall. I opened my eyes, grabbed the thick leather binder, and walked into the coffee shop. The interior smelled of dark roasted beans and damp earth. It was dimly lit and sparsely populated. Sitting in a corner booth facing the door was David Pierce. He was a man in his late 60s, wearing a faded Guayabera shirt and wire-framed glasses. He looked like an ordinary retired tourist enjoying a slow island morning, but his reputation painted a vastly different portrait. David was a former federal investigator who spent 3 decades dismantling sophisticated financial syndicates before transitioning into private forensic auditing. He specialized in elder financial abuse, the dark, quiet crimes that happen behind closed doors. I slid into the wooden booth across from him. He did not offer a warm smile or waste time with superficial pleasantries. His eyes were sharp analytical and devoid of any comforting sympathy. He pushed his empty ceramic mug aside and nodded toward the leather portfolio in my hands. I unzipped the binder and laid it flat on the table. I explained the timeline, keeping my voice clinical and detached. I walked him through the initial funeral withdrawal, the empty savings accounts, and my mother's willful denial. I turned the page, revealing the $25 charge for the mobile notary. I presented the digital scans of the bank authorization forms, pointing out the thick, shaky black ballpoint ink. I showed him the postal registry receipt, redirecting my mother's mail to the Las Vegas post office box. Finally, I slid the scanned PDF of the $150,000 home equity line of credit across the table. David leaned forward. He produced a silver penlight from his shirt pocket and illuminated the forged signatures. He scrutinized the documents with the silent focus of a surgeon examining an X-ray. He traced the routing numbers, cross-referencing the dates of the notary charge against the timeline of my father's medical records. He read the terms of the predatory lending agreement, noting the variable interest rates and the imminent default triggers. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the booth was the quiet turning of heavy paper. I watched his face, searching for shock or outrage. I found neither. David viewed human greed the way a mechanic views a broken engine. It was not a tragedy. It was simply a mechanical failure that required specific tools to dismantle. He closed the binder, resting his hands flat on the leather cover. He looked up at me and delivered a chilling, precise assessment. "Your sister thinks she committed a family dispute. She actually committed federal wire fraud." The words hung in the air, laden with sudden, terrifying power. David explained the legal architecture of Bella's actions. If she had simply drained a joint checking account, the local police would likely classify the event as a civil domestic issue. But Bella had escalated her methods. She had forged a legal document to secure a line of credit against a physical property. She had utilized digital telecommunication networks to transfer illicitly obtained funds across state lines, moving the equity from a Hawaiian bank to a Nevada limited liability shell company. She had engaged the Federal Postal Service to conceal her ongoing deception. She had unknowingly crossed multiple jurisdictional boundaries, upgrading her petty theft into a multi-agency felony. I asked him how we stopped the impending real estate transaction. I told him Bella had scheduled a fast cash closing in exactly 7 days. I explained that if the title agent wired the buyer's money to the mainland lender, the forged debt would be paid off, and the evidence of the crime would effectively vanish into a closed account. David shook his head, outlining the harsh reality of the justice system. We could not simply call a detective and expect them to arrest Bella by Friday. Financial investigations require subpoenas, warrants, and months of bureaucratic review. To stop the closing dead in its tracks, we needed a specific tactical strike. We needed to file an emergency lis pendens against the property. A lis pendens is a formal legal notice recorded in the county registry, signaling that the property is the subject of active pending litigation. The moment that notice hits the public ledger, it renders the title toxic. No sane real estate investor will purchase a property with a clouded title, and no legitimate title agency will process a transaction while an active dispute remains unresolved. David assured me he could draft the injunction and secure the necessary judicial signatures. But he issued a severe warning. The element of surprise was our only advantage. If Bella sensed any legal maneuvering, if she caught a whisper of an impending audit, she would panic. A panicked thief does not wait for the closing. She would cancel the sale, drain whatever stolen cash remained in her Nevada accounts, and vanish before the authorities could freeze her assets. We needed Bella to feel entirely safe. We needed her to walk into that living room next Friday, confident, victorious, and utterly blind to the snare closing around her ankle. David outlined my specific role in the operation. The strategy required a brutal psychological sacrifice. I could no longer play the silent, defeated sibling hiding in my downtown apartment. I had to actively participate in the illusion. I had to return to the Kailua house and become the accommodating, helpful sister. I needed to validate Bella's fake martyrdom and stroke her fragile ego. I stared at the coffee cup on the table, feeling my stomach twist into a hard knot. The thought of standing in my childhood home, watching my sister pack up my father's legacy while treating my mother like a burden, was repulsive. Swallowing my pride to serve the woman who was trying to destroy my family felt like drinking poison. David leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. He told me that anger is a luxury I could not afford. The trap required bait, and I was the only person who could deliver it. I had to go back to the house. I had to smile. I had to pack cardboard boxes. I had to offer my sister a glass of iced tea and tell her she was doing the right thing. I took a slow, deep breath, locking the revulsion away in the dark vault of my mind. I reached across the table and shook the auditor's hand. The battle plan was set. I left the quiet coffee shop and drove back toward the windward side of the island, preparing to step onto the stage and deliver the performance of a lifetime. The closing was 6 days away, and I needed to ensure my sister felt like a queen right up until the moment the crown severed her neck. I pulled into the driveway of the Kailua house on Saturday morning, the trunk of my car loaded with flattened cardboard boxes and heavy rolls of packing tape. The tropical sun was already baking the asphalt, radiating a shimmering heat haze across the street. I carried the supplies inside, bracing myself for the psychological performance of a lifetime. The interior of the home resembled a disaster zone. 30 years of careful accumulation had been dismantled and scattered across the hardwood floors, waiting to be boxed, sealed, and discarded. Bella stood in the center of the living room, holding a sweating plastic cup of iced espresso. She wore a pristine white linen resort outfit and imported leather sandals, looking as though she were directing a luxury magazine photo shoot rather than emptying her childhood home. I forced the corners of my mouth upward into a compliant, helpful smile. I set the cardboard down and asked where she needed me to begin. She took a slow sip of her drink, the ice rattling against the plastic. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with thinly veiled contempt. She pointed a manicured finger down the hall toward my father's sanctuary. "Start in the home office," she commanded. "You always were the worker bee, Naomi. You excel at the tedious little details. It is a shame you lack any real vision. That is why you will always be stuck reviewing spreadsheets while other people build actual wealth." I did not flinch. I did not defend my career or demand respect. I merely nodded, grabbed a roll of tape, and walked down the hallway. The dramatic irony vibrating in the humid air was almost intoxicating. Bella was mocking my professional discipline, oblivious to the reality that my specific skill set was currently engineering her destruction. She believed her theft was a stroke of visionary genius. She had no idea that a ruthless forensic auditor was sitting in a Kaimuki office using my tedious little details to draft a felony indictment. Her self-proclaimed vision had a rich historical precedent. A decade ago, her grand entrepreneurial vision involved launching an elite organic pet bakery that hemorrhaged money for 6 months before quietly folding. 5 years later, her vision shifted to a luxury travel consultancy that resulted in maxed-out credit lines and tearful pleas for a parental bailout. My father always paid the deficits, erasing her mistakes. Now she was funding her ultimate vision with his stolen life savings. I spent the next 4 hours in the sweltering home office, surrounded by my father's marine biology textbooks and framed academic degrees. I assembled the cardboard squares, sealing the seams, with loud tearing strips of adhesive. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, filtering through the jalousie windows. The physical labor was exhausting, but the emotional toll of dismantling my father's legacy was far heavier. Midway through the afternoon, Rosa shuffled past the doorway, carrying a stack of folded linens. She looked diminished, her shoulders stooped under the invisible weight of the impending eviction. She was surrendering her fortress without a single objection, blindly trusting the daughter who was leading her to the slaughterhouse. I wanted to drop the packing tape, pull my mother into an embrace, and promise her that the house was safe, but the strategy required total deception. I offered Rosa a gentle, reassuring smile and went back to wrapping books in old newspaper. Around 3 o'clock, Bella's mobile phone rang. The customized ringtone pierced the quiet hum of the house. She glanced at the screen and let out an exasperated sigh. She muttered a complaint about incompetent interior designers and slid the glass door open, stepping out onto the back lanai to take the call. She left her oversized designer handbag sitting on the kitchen island. Beside the expensive leather tote lay a chaotic spill of manila folders and printed documents she had been reviewing earlier in the morning. The moment the glass door slid shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted. I dropped the cardboard box I was holding and moved down the hallway with silent, urgent strides. I pulled my smartphone from my back pocket, opening the camera application. I reached the kitchen island and cast a quick glance toward the lanai. Bella was pacing across the patio, her back turned to the house, gesturing with her free hand as she argued with the contractor on the line. I had a very narrow window of opportunity. I sifted through the scattered papers, using the very tips of my fingers to avoid altering their original overlapping arrangement. Most of the documents were mundane real estate disclosures and municipal utility cancellation forms. But near the bottom of the pile, tucked inside a glossy promotional folder from the title company, I spotted the gold mine. It was a physical receipt from the mobile notary service. The document contained the exact date, the precise timestamp, and the official registered seal number of the individual who had facilitated the forged signature. I positioned my phone directly over the paper, holding my breath to steady my hands. The camera shutter clicked silently, capturing the high-resolution image. I carefully moved the receipt aside, revealing the hidden document beneath it. It was a printed confirmation page from the mainland lending institution. The page detailed the final disbursement of the $150,000 home equity line of credit. It displayed the exact routing sequence, mapping the funds straight from the Hawaiian Bank into a Nevada corporate entity registered as Horizon Escapes, LLC. It was the definitive, undeniable proof of interstate wire fraud, bridging the forgery directly to the stolen equity. I snapped the second photograph, ensuring every single account digit was perfectly legible. I slipped the papers back into their precise, original alignment. I walked away from the kitchen island, returning to the hallway, just as the heavy glass door rattled on its tracks. Bella stepped back inside the house, sliding her phone into her pocket. She complained loudly about the inflated cost of imported Italian tile for her Las Vegas bathroom remodel. I walked out of the home office carrying a sealed box and asked if she wanted a fresh glass of iced water. She accepted the offer, with a dismissive wave taking the glass without uttering a single word of thanks. I watched her drink, noting the fatal flaw that undoes every successful predator. A thief's biggest vulnerability is never a lack of intelligence. It is their arrogant assumption that everyone around them is too stupid to check the math. Bella felt secure because she believed I was a defeated, subservient drone. The afternoon dragged on, transitioning into a humid, golden evening. We had boxed up the entire living room and the majority of the kitchen. I was taping the final carton of dishes when Bella received another phone call. This time, she did not step outside. She answered the call standing right in the center of the dismantled house. I watched her face light up with a sudden, thrilling excitement. She hung up the phone and clapped her hands together, turning toward my mother and me. The buyer was eager to take possession, and the title agent had experienced a sudden cancellation in her schedule. Bella announced that the Friday closing was no longer happening. The transaction was moving up, collapsing the timeline and threatening to shatter our entire federal trap before the ink was even dry on the injunction. The text message glowed on my phone screen. The Friday afternoon closing was canceled. Bella had moved the entire transaction up by 3 hours. The signing was now scheduled for noon. My lungs forgot how to draw air. The original strategy relied on a very specific margin of error. Earlier that week, I had sat in David Pierce's austere Kaimuki office, alongside his estate attorney, a quiet, methodical man named Gerald. We had spent hours drafting the emergency injunction. Gerald explained the precise legal mechanics of the document we were preparing to deploy. It was a formal declaration of a pending dispute, recorded directly onto the county property ledger. The moment the registrar stamped that paper, the title of the Kailua house would freeze solid. No legitimate escrow officer would ever finalize a transfer of ownership with a clouded deed. But the timing was a delicate, fragile thing. If Gerald filed the paperwork too early, the online public records would update, and the title company would notify Bella of the obstruction. She would instantly realize she was caught. A cornered predator does not surrender. She would drain whatever remaining funds sat in her Nevada accounts and vanish before law enforcement could freeze her assets. If Gerald filed the paperwork too late, the ink would dry on the sale, the fraudulent equity line would be paid off, and the evidence of her forgery would disappear into a closed corporate file. We had calculated a 2-hour buffer. Gerald planned to walk into the courthouse at exactly 1 o'clock to secure the injunction for the 3 o'clock signing. Now it was Friday morning at 10:15, and Bella had just collapsed the timeline. She claimed the title agent had experienced a sudden cancellation in her schedule. That was a transparent, convenient lie. Bella was moving the deadline because she was terrified. The first day of the new month had just passed. The mainland lending institution was undoubtedly generating a default warning for the unpaid interest on the 6-figure credit line. Bella needed the cash clearinghouse to wipe the debt before the Postal Service delivered the bad news to her Las Vegas mailbox. Her greed had finally collided with her panic. I typed a frantic, urgent message to David. I informed him the target time had shifted to noon. I asked if Gerald could reach the downtown courthouse immediately. David replied a minute later. Traffic on the H1 freeway was deadlocked due to a morning collision. Gerald was in his car attempting to navigate the gridlock. He promised to run the final blocks to the county building if necessary. David instructed me to get to the Kailua house right away. My job was no longer just to observe. My job was to stall. I grabbed my car keys and practically ran out of my apartment. I stopped at a local cafe near the highway and purchased 4 expensive iced coffees, arranging them carefully in a cardboard carrier. I needed a prop. I needed a plausible excuse to walk into a room where I was explicitly unwanted. The drive over the mountains felt like navigating a bad dream. Every red light felt like a personal attack. Every slow-moving truck in the right lane drained precious seconds from the clock. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I visualized the title agent arranging the stack of contracts. I imagined my mother picking up a pen. The anxiety sat heavy in my stomach, twisting and pulling at my nerves. I pulled onto my childhood street at 11:45. The sleek, luxury SUV belonging to my sister was parked in the driveway alongside a modest gray sedan that likely belonged to the notary. I parked on the street, grabbed the sweating tray of iced coffees, and walked up the concrete path. The tropical heat pressed down on my shoulders, but my hands were cold. I did not knock. I turned the brass handle and pushed the front door open, stepping into the entryway. The interior of the house felt hollow and strange. Almost all the furniture had been removed or boxed up. The vibrant, colorful sanctuary my parents had built was reduced to bare walls and echoing hardwood floors. In the center of the living room, the mahogany dining table served as the final gathering point. Bella stood near the kitchen counter, reviewing a printed checklist. She wore a tailored beige linen dress, her hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate knot. Sitting at the table was the title agent, a professional-looking woman, organizing a thick stack of legal-size paper. Across from her sat a representative for the buyer, a young man wearing a polo shirt, tapping away on his smartphone. My mother sat in a folding chair in the corner, staring blankly at the floorboards. She looked incredibly small. The heavy front door clicked shut behind me. The sound echoed through the empty room. Bella snapped her head up. The moment she saw me, the color drained from her face. The muscles in her jaw tightened until the skin turned pale. Her eyes flashed with raw, unfiltered fury. She had explicitly told me to stay away, claiming the event would be too emotional for me to handle. My presence was an unscripted variable in her perfectly choreographed theft. She marched across the room, closing the distance between us with rapid, aggressive steps. She blocked my path to the dining table, lowering her voice to a harsh, venomous whisper. She demanded to know what I was doing here. She ordered me to turn around and leave immediately. I looked her directly in the eyes. I did not shrink back. I did not let the intimidation work. I shifted my weight and spoke in a bright, cheerful tone, projecting my voice so it carried clearly across the echoing room. I told her I brought refreshments. I smiled warmly at the title agent and the buyer's representative. I announced that I could never miss my mother's big transition day. I said I wanted to be here to support the family during such an important milestone. The title agent looked up and offered a polite, professional smile. The young man in the polo shirt nodded in greeting. The trap snapped shut around Bella. She was bound by her own pristine public image. She had spent a month cultivating the persona of a selfless, devoted daughter managing a tragic family transition. She could not suddenly transform into a screaming tyrant and physically throw her smiling, supportive sister out the front door. Causing a scene would spook the title agent. It would make the investor nervous. She had to swallow her rage and maintain the facade. Bella offered a rigid, tight-lipped smile. She accepted a plastic cup of iced coffee from the cardboard tray. Her fingers brushed against mine, and her skin was ice cold. She whispered that I needed to sit down and keep my mouth shut. I walked past her and handed a drink to my mother. Rosa looked up at me with tired, confused eyes. I squeezed her shoulder, offering a silent promise she could not yet understand. I delivered the remaining drinks to the professionals at the table and retreated to a folding chair in the far corner of the room. The clock on the kitchen wall read 11:55. The title agent unzipped her leather portfolio. She withdrew a silver pen and placed it meticulously next to the stack of deeds. She began explaining the sequence of the signatures. Her voice was a steady, monotonous drone, reciting the legal jargon of property transfers and escrow disbursements. I sat in the corner, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I watched the second hand sweep across the face of the wall clock. Every single rotation felt agonizingly slow. The quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed deafening. I slipped my phone out of my pocket, resting it flat on my thigh. The screen remained dark. There was no message from David. There was no confirmation from Gerald. Bella hovered over the table, watching the paperwork with hungry, desperate eyes. She was minutes away from clearing her fraudulent debt. She was minutes away from walking out the door with hundreds of thousands of dollars, leaving our mother destitute. The title agent sorted the final page and looked up with a pleasant customer service smile. She asked if everyone was ready to begin. I stared at the black screen of my phone. I pressed my fingernails into my palms, praying the courthouse registrar was holding a rubber stamp. The execution was starting, and I had no idea if the pardon had arrived. The air inside the Kailua house felt thick and heavy, laced with the scent of cardboard and old dust. The wall clock above the kitchen sink ticked with unrelenting precision. The minute hand clicked forward, locking onto the 12. It was exactly noon. I sat in the folding chair in the corner of the living room, a plastic cup of melting iced coffee sweating onto my palm. I stared down at my digital screen. The display remained dark. No notification from David Pierce. No confirmation from Gerald, the estate attorney. The courthouse had either failed to process the paperwork or the traffic on the interstate had thwarted our entire operation. In the center of the room, the mahogany dining table resembled a sacrificial altar. The title agent, a woman, projecting an aura of practiced corporate efficiency, arranged the final stack of thick bond paper. She smoothed the top sheet, ensuring the edges aligned perfectly. It was the warranty deed, the document that would erase my mother's ownership and launder my sister's fraudulent debt. The agent smiled, extending a sleek silver ballpoint pen toward my mother. Rosa stared at the metal cylinder as if it contained a lethal toxin. Her shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of her coerced surrender. Her fingers trembled as she reached across the polished wood, her knuckles pale. She accepted the instrument, holding it, awkwardly, hovering her wrist over the signature line. Standing directly behind her, Bella leaned forward, casting a dark shadow over the paperwork. Her eyes tracked the silver tip of the pen. Her breathing grew shallow, restricted by sheer anticipation. The payout was inches away. The laundering of her forged equity line was about to finalize, securing her a permanent escape to Nevada, while abandoning our mother to an empty bank account. The metal tip lowered millimeters from the paper. I could not wait for the digital pardon any longer. I had to step in front of the train. I drew a slow, deliberate breath, anchoring my feet firmly against the hardwood floor. My voice sliced through the suffocating quiet of the room, sharp and perfectly level. Before Mom signs that there is a discrepancy with the title. The silver pen halted freezing in midair. Rosa looked up, her tired eyes wide with sudden jarring confusion. The buyer's representative, the young man in the polo shirt, frowned and shifted his weight, his posture tightening with immediate suspicion. The title agent blinked her professional warmth, evaporating into cautious neutrality. Bella snapped her head toward me. The carefully constructed mask of the grieving, dutiful daughter fractured, revealing the desperate predator underneath. Her jaw clenched tight, the tendons in her neck straining against her skin. She commanded me to stop speaking, her tone dripping with venom. She turned to the professionals at the table, forcing a brittle, condescending laugh that echoed hollowly off the bare walls. She spun a rapid, desperate lie. She claimed I was suffering from severe emotional instability due to our father's recent passing. She painted me as an irrational sibling prone to unpredictable outbursts, incapable of handling the stress of the transition. She leaned closer to the title agent, instructing her to ignore the interruption and proceed with the signing immediately. Escrow officers are trained to avoid messy familial disputes. Any hint of coercion, any whisper of a contested deed, serves as a glaring warning sign. The agent hesitated her hand, hovering near the stack of legal documents. She looked from Bella to me, searching for clarity in the tense silence. Before the agent could render a decision, a sharp electronic chime pierced the heavy atmosphere. It was the agent's mobile device, resting face up next to her leather portfolio. The caller identification illuminated the screen, displaying the name of her downtown home office. The timing was a sheer, agonizing miracle. The agent muttered a brief, clipped apology. She picked up the device and pressed it to her ear, stepping away from the table. She turned her back to the living room, seeking a modicum of privacy near the kitchen island. The room plunged into a profound, breathless stillness. We listened to the muffled cadence of her voice. She spoke in short, affirmative bursts. "Yes, I understand. When did it hit the ledger?" "Understood." The agent lowered the phone, ending the call. She turned back to face the table. Her demeanor had undergone a drastic transformation. The polite customer service facade was gone, replaced by the rigid, guarded posture of a liability officer avoiding a legal minefield. She did not sit back down. She reached across the mahogany surface, placing her hand flat over the warranty deed. With a swift, deliberate motion, she pulled the document away from my mother, sliding it safely out of reach and into her dark leather portfolio. Bella demanded an explanation, her voice rising in pitch, the buried panic finally bleeding through her composed exterior. The agent zipped the case shut with a loud final rip of the metal teeth. She looked directly at the buyer's representative, pointedly ignoring my sister. She announced that her underwriting department had just flagged a critical update in the county registry. An emergency lis pendens had been recorded against the parcel mere minutes ago. The property was now the subject of an active pending legal dispute. The title was officially clouded. The representative in the polo shirt stood up instantly. Real estate investors dealing in fast cash transactions despise legal entanglements. They prey on frictionless desperation, seeking quick flips without the burden of protracted court battles. A clouded title represents a toxic asset. He shoved his smartphone into his pocket, grabbed his briefcase, and headed straight for the front entryway. He offered no polite farewell. He simply abandoned the transaction, washing his hands of the escalating disaster. The sudden departure shattered Bella's reality. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin an ashen, sickly gray. Her flawless escape hatch had just slammed shut, trapping her inside the burning architecture of her own design. She began to stammer, her hands fluttering in the air as she attempted to construct a coherent defense. She claimed it was a clerical error, a ridiculous mistake executed by incompetent municipal clerks. She begged the title agent to unpack the portfolio, promising to resolve the misunderstanding with a single phone call. The agent shook her head, slinging her heavy bag over her shoulder. She stated that escrow was suspended indefinitely. The firm could not process a transfer under an active injunction. The transaction was dead. As Bella reached out, attempting to grasp the agent's sleeve in a final pathetic act of desperation, a new sound echoed through the empty house. It was a firm, rhythmic knocking at the front door, 3 sharp, deliberate strikes against the heavy wooden panels. It was not the casual tap of a visiting neighbor. It was the heavy, undeniable cadence of authority. The sound froze every single person in the living room. My mother gasped, pressing a hand against her chest. The title agent stopped in her tracks, her hand resting on the doorknob. Bella stared at the entryway, her eyes wide with a primal, dawning terror. The realization of her vulnerability began to sink into her bones. She slowly turned her head, looking away from the door and locking her gaze onto me. I sat in the corner folding chair perfectly still. I did not move a single muscle. I did not offer a triumphant smile or a gloating smirk. I met her terrified stare with eyes as cold and unforgiving as deep ocean water. The dramatic irony we had lived in for the past month dissolved, replaced by the brutal, undeniable truth. She finally understood that I had not been defeated. I had been hunting her. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds, letting the crushing weight of her impending destruction settle over her shoulders. I allowed her to feel the exact same helpless isolation she had forced upon our mother. Then, keeping my voice low and steady, I delivered the line that severed her reign over our family forever. "You should get that, Bella. It is for you." The brass handle of the front door turned. The heavy wooden panels swung inward, groaning on their hinges. The title agent, who had been clutching her leather portfolio in the entryway, took a rapid step backward. Her escape route was suddenly blocked by 3 figures standing on the concrete porch. David Pierce crossed the threshold first. He wore the same faded shirt and wire-framed glasses from our meeting at the Kaimuki coffee shop, but his demeanor had hardened into something cold and impenetrable. He did not look like a retired tourist anymore. He looked like an executioner. Flanking him on the left was a broad-shouldered man wearing a muted gray sport coat. A gold shield was clipped to his leather belt, identifying him as a detective from the Honolulu Financial Crimes Division. He was operating on civil standby, present strictly to maintain the peace and witness the proceedings. On David's right stood a quiet woman holding a canvas satchel, a licensed notary public brought in to legally certify whatever confessions or documents emerged from the confrontation. The air in the living room grew incredibly dense. The power dynamic shifted so violently, it felt like the atmospheric pressure had dropped. The young investor in the polo shirt, who had halted his initial exit when the door opened, pressed himself against the drywall. He wanted no part of the incoming storm, but he was too terrified to push past the detective. David ignored the frantic energy radiating from my sister. He walked directly to the center of the room, approaching the mahogany dining table. He displaced the empty space where the voided warranty deed had rested just moments before. He unlatched his weathered briefcase. The sharp metallic click echoed in the silent house. He withdrew a sleek silver laptop and a thick manila folder, placing them deliberately onto the polished wood. He did not introduce himself to Bella. He turned his attention to my mother, who was still sitting in the folding chair, trembling. David softened his voice, speaking with measured, respectful cadence. He informed Rosa that he was a forensic auditor, retained to protect her estate and secure her assets. The sound of his title broke the paralysis gripping my sister. Bella lunged forward, her linen dress wrinkling as she slapped her hand onto the dining table. She demanded to know who allowed them inside. She ordered them to leave her property immediately, threatening to call the police and report a home invasion. The detective shifted his stance, resting his thumbs on his belt. He looked at Bella with bored, professional indifference. He advised her to lower her voice and remain exactly where she was standing. His calm, authoritative tone extinguished her threat instantly. David flipped open his laptop. The screen illuminated, casting a pale blue glow across his weathered face. He turned the device around so the display faced Bella. He tapped the keyboard, bringing up a high-resolution magnification of the loan origination document. Beside it, he opened a scanned digital image of my father's genuine signature, retrieved from decades of verified tax returns. The presentation was clinically ruthless and devoid of any emotional padding. David began to dismantle her lies, piece by piece. He detailed the biomechanics of the handwriting. He pointed to the thick, heavy pooling of the dark ink on the fraudulent contract, explaining how the pressure points indicated a slow, deliberate tracing, rather than a natural fluid motion. He contrasted the clumsy forgery with the precise, sharp strokes of the blue graphite my father exclusively utilized for every legal document he ever touched. Bella opened her mouth to deny the accusation, but David did not give her oxygen. He reached into his manila folder and produced the physical receipt from the mobile notary. It was a blown-up printout of the exact photograph I had secured from her chaotic pile of papers on the kitchen island. He laid the receipt next to the keyboard. He read the timestamp aloud. He cross-referenced the date with a printed page from my father's medical records. The timeline proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the man was submerged in a medically induced coma during the exact hour the loan was supposedly authorized. The polished, pristine facade my sister had maintained for months shattered into a million jagged pieces. Her resort aesthetic dissolved, leaving behind a cornered, desperate predator. She lost control of her breathing. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me, unleashing a torrent of venomous accusations. She shrieked that I was a jealous, vindictive sibling trying to steal her hard-earned reward. She claimed she deserved every single penny of that equity. She justified her actions by listing the endless emotional sacrifices she had supposedly made dealing with our parents over the years. She yelled that our father owed her a fresh start and the money was her rightful inheritance. She attempted to reframe her calculated felony as a delayed payment for her manufactured suffering. Her voice bounced off the bare walls, shrill and chaotic. I sat in my corner chair watching her self-destruct. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I only felt the cold satisfaction of watching the truth drag her out of the shadows. David Pierce let her scream. He watched her tantrum with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. When she finally ran out of breath, he did not raise his voice to reprimand her. He simply reached back into his folder and extracted a single crisp sheet of paper. He slid the document across the mahogany table until it stopped inches from her trembling hands. It was the wire transfer routing confirmation. David read the digits aloud, his voice cutting through the ringing silence. $310,000. He recited the originating account number. He named the destination routing code. He identified the receiving entity as Horizon Escapes, a limited liability corporation registered in the state of Nevada. He explained that she had funneled the cash out of a local institution to purchase a luxury condominium across the ocean. He looked her directly in the eyes. His expression held zero mercy. "That is interstate wire fraud," he stated plainly. The words hung in the humid air, carrying the full, crushing weight of the federal penal code. The moment that specific legal phrase left the auditor's mouth, the atmosphere in the room changed again. The young investor in the polo shirt realized he was standing in the epicenter of a major criminal investigation. The prospect of losing a cheap real estate flip paled in comparison to being named as a witness or a co-conspirator in a federal indictment. The investor pushed away from the drywall. He did not say a word. He bolted through the open front door, sprinting down the concrete path toward his vehicle. The title agent, who had been clutching her portfolio to her chest, watched him flee. Escrow officers rely on clean licenses and pristine reputations to maintain their livelihoods. Being present during the exposure of a forged deed and a stolen inheritance is a career-ending liability. She shot one terrified glance at the detective, tightened her grip on her bag, and followed the investor out the door, running down the driveway without looking back. The front door clicked shut behind them, propelled by the afternoon breeze. Bella was left standing in the wreckage of her own arrogance. The buyers were gone. The escrow agent had vanished. The fraudulent debt could no longer be laundered through a fast cash closing. Her escape hatch was permanently sealed. She was surrounded by law enforcement, a forensic auditor, and the undeniable paper trail of her own greed. She stared down at the wire transfer receipt, her chest heaving. The reality of a prison sentence began to manifest in her wide, panicked eyes. I watched her posture change. A normal person confronted with this mountain of evidence would collapse into tears and beg for mercy. But toxic individuals do not surrender. They merely search for a different weapon. Bella grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning stark white. Her panic receded, replaced by a dark, frantic calculation. She lifted her chin, a defiant, bitter sneer twisting her lips. She looked at David Pierce and prepared to play her final, fatal card, believing she still held one last legal maneuver that could save her stolen fortune. The silence left behind by the fleeing professionals stretched into a tense, fragile wire. Bella stood alone at the edge of the mahogany table. Her chest heaved, drawing shallow, frantic breaths. She looked from the open front door to the stoic detective and finally back to the forensic auditor. A cornered animal eventually stops looking for an exit and bares its teeth. The initial shock wearing off, my sister gathered the fragmented pieces of her shattered pride. She let go of the table and stood up straight, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of her linen dress. A sharp, brittle sound escaped her lips. It was a laugh stripped of any actual humor. The sound echoed off the bare walls of the living room, harsh and grating. She crossed her arms over her chest, lifting her chin in a display of profound, unearned defiance. She stared down at David Pierce and told him he was wasting his time. Her voice regained its familiar, condescending edge. She declared the entire investigation was a hollow bluff, a pathetic attempt by a jealous sibling to rewrite a finished narrative. She looked at me, sitting quietly in the corner, and rolled her eyes. Then she turned her attention back to the auditor, preparing to reveal what she believed was an impenetrable legal shield. Bella announced that she had not stolen a single dime. She stated that she had contacted the financial institution the day after our father died and submitted a revised beneficiary designation form. She proudly explained her maneuver. She had requested the paperwork filled out the primary fields, listing herself as the sole inheritor, and signed the documents using her own name. She claimed the bank processed her request, authorized the disbursement, and wired the funds directly into her personal account. She smiled a cold, triumphant smirk. She declared that because the financial institution approved the transfer, the transaction was legitimate. She had legally claimed the $310,000 as her rightful inheritance. She told the auditor he could not arrest her for receiving a verified banking wire. She thought she had found a brilliant loophole, outsmarting the system by putting her own identity on the beneficiary claim. I watched her gloat. Her arrogance was a towering monument to her profound ignorance. She had spent her entire adult life avoiding real work, ignoring the tedious details of financial planning, and relying on other people to manage her debts. She saw a pile of cash and lunged for it, never pausing to question the architecture holding it together. David Pierce did not interrupt her victory speech. He let her revel in her fabricated triumph. He watched her with the detached clinical focus of a surgeon preparing to make the final incision. When her smug smile reached its peak, he reached into his weathered briefcase one last time. He withdrew a thin blue folder. He placed it carefully on the table, opening the cover to reveal a stack of tax forms bearing the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. David offered a faint, chilling smile. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her statement. He agreed with her. He confirmed that she had indeed contacted the institution, requested the forms, and filed the beneficiary paperwork strictly under her own Social Security number. He validated her claim that she had acted as the sole recipient of the funds. Bella stood taller, her smirk widening. She thought she had won the argument. Then David dropped the blade. He tapped the top document in the blue folder. He informed my sister that her fundamental error was assuming the wealth consisted of standard, post-tax liquid capital. He explained that our father was a meticulous planner who utilized specific financial instruments to shield his earnings from annual taxation. The $310,000 she extracted was not sitting in a simple savings ledger. It was a traditional individual retirement account. The words hung in the humid air. Bella blinked her brow, furrowing in slight confusion. The technical terminology failed to immediately register in her mind. She lacked the basic financial literacy to comprehend the snare closing around her throat. David broke down the mechanics of her fatal mistake using a slow, deliberate cadence. He explained that a traditional IRA consists entirely of pre-tax contributions. The government allows the principal to grow for decades without taking a cut under the strict condition that taxes will eventually be collected upon withdrawal. Our father had designed the account to distribute small, manageable monthly stipends to our mother, ensuring Rosa would remain in a low-income bracket and pay minimal obligations over the next 20 years. Bella had destroyed that careful strategy by forging the authorization and extracting the entire $310,000 in a single, non-qualified lump sum distribution. She triggered a catastrophic financial event. The color vanished from my sister's face, replacing her defiant smirk with a mask of dawning horror. David articulated the brutal arithmetic. Taking a lump sum distribution of that magnitude classified the entire amount as immediate taxable income for the current fiscal year. By forcing the funds into her own accounts, Bella pushed her annual earnings into the highest possible federal bracket. She was instantly subject to a 37% income tax rate. Furthermore, because she was only in her late 30s and far below the legal retirement age, the government imposed a mandatory 10% early withdrawal penalty. Adding the state obligations to the federal burden, the math became an inescapable nightmare. The auditor looked directly into her panicked eyes. He stated that the Internal Revenue Service does not care about family dysfunction, forged deeds, or sibling rivalries. The federal government only cares about the name printed on the distribution paperwork. Because Bella had actively filed the beneficiary claim under her own Social Security number to intercept the funds quickly, the IRS legally viewed her as the sole recipient of the taxable income. She had signed her own name to the liability. She did not just steal a fortune, she successfully stole a staggering federal tax debt. She owed the government over $140,000. Bella stumbled backward, her hip colliding with a stack of packed cardboard boxes. She clutched her chest, gasping for air, as the true scale of her disaster materialized. She began to shake her head, muttering frantic denials. She claimed she would just return the money, canceling the transaction. She pleaded with the auditor, promising to wire the funds back to the original institution that very afternoon. David adjusted his wire-framed glasses, offering zero mercy. He informed her that the 60-day rollover window had already expired. The transaction was permanent. The taxable event was sealed. The debt belonged to her, and the federal government is the most ruthless collection agency on the planet. She screamed that she did not possess an extra $140,000 to pay a tax bill. She had already spent a significant portion of the stolen equity. She had funded an expensive Las Vegas vacation, leased a luxury vehicle, and closed on a high-rise condominium in Nevada. She was cash poor, holding nothing but expensive liabilities. David closed the blue folder. He explained the final phase of her ruin. He detailed the process of a federal tax lien. When a citizen defaults on a six-figure obligation, the government does not negotiate. They target physical assets. The Internal Revenue agents would locate the Nevada Limited Liability Shell Company she established to hide the real estate purchase. They would pierce the corporate veil, place a permanent lien on the luxury condominium, and seize the property. They would auction her new home to recover the stolen taxes. They would garnish any future wages she attempted to earn. My sister had engineered her own financial obliteration. She spent a month believing she was a visionary genius, outsmarting her tedious, rule-abiding sibling. In reality, she had blindly walked into a minefield, strapping the explosives to her own chest and handing the detonator to the federal government. The silence that followed the auditor's presentation was profound. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to amplify, echoing the steady, relentless march of her impending ruin. Bella collapsed into one of the folding chairs, burying her face in her trembling hands. The pristine resort outfit now looked like a costume draped over a broken mannequin. In the corner of the room, my mother sat paralyzed. Rosa had spent the last hour watching the illusion of her perfect golden child disintegrate. The forged home equity line, the stolen inheritance, the deliberate mail interception, and the crushing tax liability laid bare a truth too horrifying to ignore. The daughter she had shielded for decades was willing to leave her homeless and destitute just to fund a fleeting fantasy. Bella lifted her tear-streaked face from her hands. Desperation stripped away the last remnants of her dignity. She turned her frantic, bloodshot eyes toward Rosa. The predator, having exhausted every legal loophole, reverted to her oldest, most reliable weapon. She looked at the mother she had just tried to ruin and prepared to beg. The heavy silence following the auditor's revelation pressed down on the living room like a physical weight. Bella scrambled out of the folding chair. Her pristine linen dress was wrinkled, clinging to her damp skin. She stumbled across the hardwood floor toward our mother. She dropped to her knees beside the metal chair, grasping Rosa's hands. The arrogant predator evaporated, replaced by a terrified child seeking her traditional shield. She begged our mother to sell the house anyway. She pleaded for a financial rescue, demanding Rosa liquidate the property to pay the federal tax debt and save her from the government lien. She utilized the exact same manipulative tone that had secured her bailouts for 3 decades, crying about her fragile mental state and unfair circumstances. Rosa did not immediately pull her hands away. She sat perfectly still, staring down at the crown of her favorite daughter's head. For 32 years, my mother had absorbed every single shockwave Bella created. She had paid the credit card debts, covered the failed business loans, and sacrificed her own peace to maintain the illusion of a happy family. But the forged home equity document resting on the mahogany table was a bridge too far. The realization severed the umbilical cord of toxic enabling. Bella had traced our dying father's signature to steal the roof over her own mother's head. Rosa looked up from Bella and looked at me. Her tired eyes traced the outline of my face, seeing the daughter who had stayed silent, the daughter she had falsely accused of greed. A profound shame washed over her features. Rosa slowly pulled her trembling hands out of Bella's desperate grip. She straightened her posture, pushing her shoulders back. She looked down at the woman kneeling on the floor and spoke a single word. No. The syllable was barely louder than a whisper, but it echoed through the empty house with the force of a thunderclap. Bella froze, her mouth falling open in sheer disbelief. She reached out again, but Rosa stood up, pushing the folding chair backward. My mother stepped away from the golden child, leaving Bella kneeling alone on the bare hardwood floor. Rosa walked across the room, closing the distance between us. She stopped a few feet away from my chair, tears spilling over her eyelashes, tracing wet paths down her weathered cheeks. She offered a raw, agonizing apology. She asked for my forgiveness, admitting her blindness, confessing her cowardice. I stood up and wrapped my arms around her narrow shoulders, letting her weep against my collarbone. I held her tight, but I did not offer a blanket pardon. Healing requires strict boundaries. I told my mother I would repair the damage to the estate. I promised to pay off the forged loan to fix the title and to keep her secure in her home. But I stated clearly that Bella was financially severed from the family tree. There would be no more rescues. Bella realized the well was permanently dry. The wailing stopped. She picked herself up off the floor, her face flushed red with a potent mix of embarrassment and lingering spite. She grabbed her designer handbag from the kitchen counter and marched toward the front door. She threw a string of bitter curses over her shoulder, promising we would regret abandoning her. She slammed the heavy wooden door behind her, rattling the jealousy windows in their frames. The engine of her leased luxury vehicle roared to life in the driveway. The tires screeched against the asphalt, fading into the distance. It was the last time she ever set foot inside the Kailua house. The subsequent months delivered a brutal lesson in accountability. The federal government operates with a relentless, terrifying efficiency. When Bella failed to pay the staggering tax penalty, the Internal Revenue Service initiated a severe collection protocol. They located her Nevada Shell Corporation, piercing the limited liability veil with a few keystrokes. The agents placed a federal tax lien on the Las Vegas condominium she had purchased with the stolen retirement funds. The property was seized and auctioned at a fraction of its market value. The proceeds barely covered the initial penalty, leaving her drowning in mounting interest charges. Bella was financially obliterated. She lost the leased vehicle. She exhausted her remaining credit lines trying to hire defense attorneys who required exorbitant retainers she could no longer afford. The sister, who viewed honest labor as an insult, was forced to seek minimum wage employment just to survive. But the government does not allow a debtor to keep their full paycheck. They secured a wage garnishment order, siphoning a significant percentage of her hourly earnings directly into the federal treasury. She will spend the next 2 decades working grueling shifts merely to pay off the interest on the money she stole from a dying man. It is a profound, flawless, poetic justice. The extended family experienced a sudden, miraculous shift in perspective. Once the details of the forged deed and the federal tax fraud circulated through the local gossip networks, the loyalties realigned. Auntie Clara left a tearful voicemail claiming she was manipulated and begging to bring a casserole to Sunday dinner. Cousin Sophia sent long text messages apologizing for her hasty judgments. Uncle Hector tried to stop by the house to offer his belated support. I employed the exact same strategy I used during the initial smear campaign: strategic silence. I deleted the voicemails, I blocked their phone numbers, I locked the front gate. Family members who demand your silence to protect a predator do not deserve a seat at your table after you win the war. I worked closely with David Pierce and Gerald, the estate attorney, to clean up the wreckage. I utilized my own corporate savings to temporarily service the interest on the fraudulent equity line while the legal team negotiated a settlement with the mainland lender. We provided the undeniable proof of forgery, compelling the bank to release the lien on the Kailua property. Once the title was pristine, Gerald drafted a comprehensive legal fortress. We placed the home and the remaining fragmented assets into an irrevocable trust. We designated a neutral third-party fiduciary to oversee the administration, requiring dual signatures for any future encumbrances. The house is permanently safe. Rosa can spend the rest of her days listening to the ocean breeze rustle through her plumeria trees without ever fearing a sudden eviction. I am sitting on my own lanai right now, watching the sun dip below the horizon line of the Pacific Ocean. The sky is painting itself in vibrant shades of bruised purple and dark orange. The warm trade winds are blowing, carrying the scent of salt water and damp earth. My laptop is resting on my knees, mirroring the posture I held the day I discovered the empty ledger. But the suffocating anxiety is gone, replaced by a cold, enduring peace. People often ask me if I feel any guilt about deploying a forensic auditor against my own flesh and blood. They wonder if the punishment outweighs the crime. I sip my coffee and watch the tide pull back against the sand. My father taught me that true wealth is not what you take, but what you protect. I protected the woman who raised me. I protected the legacy of a man who worked 40 years to build a safe harbor. Sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer a toxic family member is to step aside and let them steal their own ruin. Bella believed she was a visionary securing a wealthy future. Instead, she signed her own name to a lifetime of indentured servitude. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I appreciate you listening to the quiet details of a loud betrayal. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts on how this ended. Would you have warned her about the tax trap, or would you have let her sign her own name to it?